In this video, we will see how we can update the user data using JSP servlets and CRUD operations. So till now we have seen how to insert the data to database, retrieve the data from database and display it in our view using MVC architecture. So now we'll see how we can update it. So we will create a form where user can write the data what they have to update, and then we'll get that data and update it to the database and we will display it back. So this is what we'll be doing this, and we will follow the MVC architecture, model view controller architecture to do this. So first I have to create a JSP file where I have to update data. So I'll say update user.jsp, and then what I'll do is I will copy some code from inserting the data. So I'll copy some data from user data, some code I'll copy from here. So I'll copy this entire body part because it's just the same for updating form. Only one extra thing I have to add here is I have to even take the ID for which I have to input. So I'll say input, and then I'll say type, and I'll specify here as text. Okay, and then I'll say name is equals to, I'll say UID, that is user ID. Placeholder, I'll say enter the ID to update, enter the user ID to update, and then I'll say required, because without this I cannot update. Without having primary key as your condition, you cannot update into database. So this is the same form what we'll be using, which we used for inserting. We will be using same for updating. So first and foremost, I'll remove this action because I have to update it. Now once I've removed, once our view is ready, I can go ahead and I can create a controller for this. So back in my controller, I'll create a new controller, that is servlet, called as update user, and I'll press on finished. So I have the controller ready. Now I'll remove all these comments. I only need do post because I'll be sending the form data using post method. So I only need do post method. So now we have clean and neat servlet. Okay. So now I have to write the program to get this data for updating. So instead of value submit, I'll say update. Okay. Now in this update, I have to get this data. So I'll say string of, in fact it is int of ID is equals to request dot get parameter as UID. That is the first input what we created. Yes. And then I have to change the type. Okay, this is string, so I have to typecast this to integer. So I can say integer dot parse int, and I'll say this entire data, that is whatever I'm getting data, it is in form of string, so I have to parse it to integer. Then I'll say string of name is equals to request dot get parameter, and what is the parameter name? I need uname, that is username. Then I'll say string of email is equals to request dot get parameter, and what is the name I want? I'll say you email. Then string, then I'll say after email I'll say city is equals to request dot get parameter, and then I'll say ucity, that is user city. So what are this uname, uemail, ucity I'm getting? It is just the name of each and every input tag. You see this? It's just the name given to each input tag. Okay, one small typo mistake here, it will be get parameter. So now I can copy this servlet name and I can paste it in my action. That is, once I press on this update button, so it should go to this servlet, and this servlet should get the data. Yes. Now once it gets the data, we have to model the data. So how can we model it? So we had created a bean or model, right? So user model, I'll call it user is equals to new user model. So here I have created an object. So first I have to go and import this because it is there in other package, right? So it's in this model package, so I have to go and import it. So once imported, then I can say user dot set id as id, this id variable I'm setting. Then I'll say user dot set, then I'll say set name as, I'll get it from this variable called name. Then I will say user dot set email, and then I'll say get it from this variable called as email, and then I'll say user dot set city, and I'll get it from this variable called as city. So now what we are doing here is we have modeled the data. So we are receiving the data from view. Once I receive the data from view, I have modeled it. So in my controller, I received the data and I modeled it. So now I have to send to DAO. So before sending to DAO, first we have to write the code. So going back to user DAO, now I'll create a method in order to update the data. Yes. So I'll create a method called as public static. Then I'll say return type, I'll get it as int. That is, it returns how many rows got updated, right? So it'll return int. So I'll say int, and then I'll say update user data by id. Now it is very important to give meaningful name so that the user understands what your code is doing or what this particular method is doing. So update user data by id clearly gives a meaning that I'm updating the user data by id. So you have to learn to give meaningful methods name. Then I'll say int of result is equals to initially 0, and I'll say return result so that all this error goes away. Now I have to write the program and connection and updating the data. So first I'll create a try catch block, and I'll say exception e, and I'll say e dot print stack trace. Okay, I've written something wrong. Print stack trace, so that all the errors or exception will be printed so that we can debug easily. If any exception, we can debug easily. Okay, so now again, as I said, the first two lines are similar for all this, so we can go ahead and we can copy this first two lines and paste it here, so the connection will be same. So connection is done. So now that once the connection is done, I have to write the SQL query. So I'll use a prepared statement. Prepared statement pst is equals to con dot prepare a statement. And what is the statement to be prepared? So I'll say update crud dot user. Okay, then I'll say set. So this is the SQL query syntax which you have to remember. It is update, then I have to give table name, and I have to say set column values, and I have to give where condition. So update crud dot user set name. We cannot set id. Why we cannot set id? Because id is the primary key and we cannot update that. Yes. Now set name is equals to question mark. That is, I have to get this data from user, comma set email is equals to question mark, comma, then I'll say city is equals to question mark. Now you may be thinking, I'll just update name, right? Or if I'm just changing email, why should I write name and city? That is because when you have the form here, in this form you have asked for name, email and city. So if the user changes two data, both the data or all the three data, then you should be in a state where it should update all at once, right? So I will do this. Okay, so once this is done, then I'll say set all this data where my id is equal to question mark. That is, I will be specifying the id. For that id you should perform this. So now we have to prepare the statement. So I'll say pst dot set string. So why set string? Because my first question mark I have to replace it with string. So I'll say set string. In first question mark I need user dot get name. Why do I need to get name? Because I'm specifying the value name here, right? Then I'll say pst dot set string, and then in place of second question mark, what should I add? Email, right? So I'll say user dot get email. So I'll get the email from the object. Then I'll say pst dot set string, and I'll say 3, comma, then I'll say user dot get city. I'm getting this city in place of third question mark, string interpolation. Now in the final one I need id. I'll say pst dot set int. Why int? Because the last type is int in my database, right? So in place of fourth question mark, I'll say user dot get id, so that integer should be set. So once this is done, I'll say result is equals to pst dot execute update. So it will execute, it will update, and it will return me numbers of row executed. So that it returns me number of row executed, I will be returning this from the result. So now my DAO part is done for updating. So we have finally finished the database related code. Now I can go ahead and I can write in this controller the logic to call my DAO and get the data from my database. How can I do that? I'll say int of result is equals to user DAO dot, you can see here, update user data by ID, and I've specified this user. So it will go this user and it will update and it will return me result. So if result is 1, that means it was successfully added. If not, then I'll show error. So I'll say if my result is greater than 0, that means it is successfully added. So I can do one thing, I can redirect them to my display user. I can redirect to them display user where it can display the data. So instead of using request dispatcher, I'll simply use response dot send redirect. Now what is the difference between using a request dispatcher to send them to JSP or response dot send redirect? Now if you are carrying a data, now if you are moving from controller to view.jsp, or you're moving to a view, and along moving you're carrying some data, then you have to use request dispatcher. Like in our previous example, so while we were going from controller to view, we were carrying some data, right? So there you have to use request dispatcher. Here I'm not carrying any data, so I won't use. So where should it go? Now again, I cannot display view user. Why? Before that, my display user should be invoked, right? So I'll go to my display user, copy this URL, and I will paste it in my user update here. So I'll say that you simply redirect to this page. That means this line says you simply redirect to this page. Now in the same place, if I use request dispatcher, that means same thing. It will redirect to that page, but it will carry some data with it. So here I'm not carrying any data, so I'm using a simple send redirect. But this happens only if this is true. If it is false, then that means there are two things. Either there was some connection error, or that ID what the user gives. So that ID what the user specified, if it is wrong, then it won't happen, then it will return 0. So I can say print writer out is equals to response dot get writer, and then here I'll say out dot println, and here I'll say user ID entered not available. So I have to include this print writer from java.io. So here we have written a simple logic that if the data was successfully updated, then what you do, simply redirect to display user. That is, it will call this display user, which will internally call view user JSP. With that, it will carry along one data, that is the complete data from database. Yes, and if it is false, that means there are two things. Either there was some connection error, which will not, because till now we have seen insert and update, right? Delete, insert and retrieve. That means our database connection, everything is good. Then there's only one case that is wrong, that is user ID. If it is not available, then only it will not update. So we have finally returned this. Now we can try and execute this. So I'll go to update user, right click, then I'll say run as, run on server. So I'll save all the files. So I'll run on my Tomcat server. It is starting the server. Okay, now I got this. So here it is asking me to update. So enter ID to update. So what ID I'll get? So I'll update first user. So I'll say enter 1. Name, let it be as Aman. Email, I'll change it from Aman to Aman to Aman@gmail.com. And city, I will write Bangalore itself. Yes. Then I'll press on update. So if I press on update, after updating, see, it is coming back, and see this. You see the data is being changed here, right? So how is this happening? So my data from view, I'm getting it here in my controller. Then I have modeled the data, and then I'm calling that method from DAO which says update the user, and I'm passing this object. So it will go ahead and it will update it, and it will return me 1 if it is successfully updated. So it will be stored in here. So if my result is greater than 1, that means it is successfully updated. I'll just go ahead and I'll say you call the display user controller. If this is false, then you can print user ID not available. So we'll try that example also. You see this? It is gone to display, right? So now I'll execute this again, and now I'll give an ID that is not available so that you see what will happen. So I'll say ID 3. There is no such ID, right? Okay. So now I have this data. I'll press on update. So see here, what is the error it is showing? User ID entered not available. Why? Because when I call this method, so it went to my DAO and it was trying to update data where ID is equals to 3. So do we have any data where ID is 3? No, right? So it will give an 0. Why 0? Because see here, initially what have I specified, result is equals to 0. It will return 0. Then coming to user, what will be the value here in result? This complete thing will return me a 0. So this will be 0. And then because this is false, it will go to my else part and it will display this error. So understood how to update the data using MVC architecture and handling some cases like user ID not available and so. So this is how you update the data using MVC architecture, where we had view. From view we got the data to controller, that is our servlet. From there we modeled the data and then we gave it to our DAO, inserted and got it back. So it is exactly same as your inserting of database, there where what MVC architecture we followed there, same kind of MVC architecture we have followed here. So this is how you use update in JSP Servlet.